I'm Dave Norvell, like Christina said, Director of Sustainability and Energy Management at the campus. A couple of years ago, we created a department where we combined the two different ideas into one. The university really believes that the greatest inroads in sustainability can be made through energy efficiency right now, that has the greatest benefit for at least the short-term period. And I'm hoping to share that with you today. Like Christina said, this is the first in series of four. We're going to kind of introduce energy management and some of the techniques we use, but then in the next three, we're going to dig into the three main categories that we categorize everything into, all the loads into, what we call demand-side management of heating, ventilation, air conditioning as one category, lighting, and then everything else we categorize as plug load. This is a process that we used at UCF, and it's almost exactly like the Energy Star process. It's a very slight modification, and it came from there originally, from their site. And so I encourage you to use something like this. This is kind of give us an order for what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about, first of all, getting your organization to make a commitment toward these things and how important I think that is. And then finding out where you are right now, assessing performance. Like we need to have really clear ways to evaluate our buildings, and that's part of what this kilowatt crackdown is all about. So it really fits in nicely with that. Next would be to set goals. What are you trying to accomplish? Set some realistic goals that can be met, and then finally implementing those things. And again, those are those demand-side management strategies that we're going to talk about in the future. And it's important to understand that this is a never-ending cycle. This helps us remember that when we have a number of people on our team, so we have people working in different phases of this cycle at one time simultaneously. For us, it really keeps going all the time. But some of those things that we use can definitely be applied to your organization, no matter what size they are. We go out and find these what we call energy conservation measures, or ECMs, and we prioritize them according to payback and things like that. So they become part of the plan, and then as they rise to the top of the list, what is going to be the most benefit to the university with the least cost, then those are what gets implemented next, and we just move down that list. And so as we go through time, our payback periods get longer and longer, as you can imagine, and the projects get less and less economically attractive. But it's remarkable, and I'm hoping I share that with you today, how much there is you can do with really, really low dollar incentives out there. So the first step is to make a commitment. This is where the salesman comes out, and you've got to get with whoever runs the organization and really sell energy efficiency. And so what we did here is we kind of, before I had a whole group, I was by myself, and I did a couple of little projects, and they produced some really huge savings because I could go out and I could hand pick what I wanted to really show. And so I took that information to the administration. And in our case, we have a president for the university, and he has a cabinet of vice presidents and things like that. And those are the people that are really the decision makers for the university. So I'm having to go to them and present on what we've been able to do and what we think we can do. So I want to emphasize that you've got to get to the very top of the organization, and they not only have to, agree with you, they have to actually walk the walk. That saying out there. So we ask them to not only back us economically, but also to really get out there and share with the rest of the university community what we're doing and how important it is to that group that we can really make inroads into the staff, faculty, and students. So this is an actual slide that we made for the president. This was presented to our president back in 2005. We told him that the university is continuing to grow. As you can imagine, we've had dramatic growth in the last, I don't know how long, last 10 years has been pretty dramatic. And because of that, we're continuing to use more energy, and we're also becoming more research oriented, which also drives up our energy per square foot kind of thing. So even our existing buildings are sometimes going to use more energy as we get more research oriented. We also talked about the cost of energy, how we have no control over that. That's something that's set by the state, and it's regulated. We're in a regulated environment. We can't choose who we buy electricity from. And the trend is upward for the next near future. And back there in 2005, it was actually a pretty radical increase going on then. Now it's leveled off a little bit, but we still think the trend is upward. Most consider energy a free commodity. That's a really important one, that when you're not at home, when you're not paying the bill, it's hard to think about turning off the lights when you leave your office, kind of thing. So we have that. I'm sure you have it in your institutions. We have that as a main theme in the university, that we're trying to reverse that trend, and trying to get people to understand that we're all one big community, and what can be reduced in our individual offices affects the entire university, and it affects, maybe the elimination of future programs for the university and such. So it's important for them to really take ownership of what they can do in their own offices. Few programs in place at that point. Back then, we had done very little, and we thought there was huge opportunities. Now we're 3 or 4 years later. I still think we have just about as much opportunity as we did back then, even though we're now saving the university about $1.4 million a year. I still think we've got a huge lot of ground to cover still on the really quick payback stuff. There's some things that can be done with just some policy changes. And we actually, part of the result of this presentation, we were able to get an energy policy through. We told the president that we think that some minor policy changes that wouldn't really cause any inconvenience could produce up to about a 10% savings for the university, which is really significant in our case. And I think that's true for any organization. And so we were able to get that through. And finally, the challenge is not going to go away, and we need to get moving. So the first step is to sell to the organization. The second one is to assess performance. And this is kind of the early part of Kilowatt Crackdown. What we're all about here is trying to develop a baseline on the buildings, what the building has done in the past, and try to figure out what factors are related to that consumption. So we're talking about the baselining, and we're talking about energy audits. That's another thing I'm going to talk about today. There's different levels of audits, and there's some that you can do yourselves, you can do with your facility staff, and then there's some of them that you need to bring in professionals for. Monthly bill analysis. Is there anyone in the room now looking at their bills monthly and putting them into spreadsheets? Anybody doing that? That's pretty typical. That's the very basics of when you're running an organization and you want to look at energy. That's got to be a starting point, and I really recommend that. And we're going to show a little bit about what the benefits of that might be. Real-time monitoring is something we use at UCF. When I got there about 8 years ago, the very first project I worked on was this open energy information system. There's lots of these commercial products out there, but we chose to do it ourselves. I had a very small budget, and I could either invest it into monitoring the stuff, or I could use it for projects. So I chose to figure out a way to do the monitoring without paying for it, and use the money for projects actually to reduce energy. And then finally, equipment submetering is something you take to the next level. If you've got the whole building monitored and you still don't understand what's happening, you can go in with portable equipment. Usually it's portable equipment, and go into the individual systems and try to isolate the HVAC from the lighting, from the plug, what have you, or even individual pieces of equipment within that subcategory. So this rectangle represents a utility cost for a modest-sized commercial building, and this is often what the facility person is stuck with. They get this monthly bill, it gets paid, and then it goes into a file. And that's not much information and not much to go with there. And so we need to break that down a little bit and get into some finer detail. So out of that $10,000, about $1,500 is at a minimum. I would say this is true. This slide is several years old, and I would say it's more like 22% right now on the average commercial building. That's just pure waste, and it's things that can be easily eliminated with no capital outlay whatsoever. These kind of things can be reduced. And so what is that waste? What is it really? I'm sorry, I got my slides out of order. What are attitudes that I run into when I go meet with building owners and in the field or whatever? 3 different attitudes that I see. Either they don't know this is happening or whatever, which is fairly common, or they do know but they don't care about it, which is one you do run into, but can't do much for those people. And then the third category is the ones we work with that do know that it's going on and do care, but don't know how to get there. And so we're going to cover that today, and some of the things that we can do to reduce that waste. Out of the 85% that's required, we talked about this before, the largest category is HVAC. We're in a hot, humid environment here in Central Florida. So all of our air that comes into our buildings, we have to bring in ventilation to meet code. And that air has to be not only cooled down, it also has to be dehumidified. And that dehumidification process is much more energy intensive than the cooling is. So it ends up being about 40% of our load on a typical commercial building. Lighting is the next biggest category, and it's just slightly under a third. And then everything else we call plug load, and that's everything that plugs into the wall that's not lighting or HVAC. Now let's look at that $1,500 of waste. Where's that going? If you have an older building, it may be to aging equipment, or it may be a lack of maintenance to that equipment. You know, everyone knows how often you're supposed to change your filter at home, but what's happening in your commercial buildings? Are your filters getting maintained on the commercial side? They need the same kind of attention that you give your home equipment, if not more, depending on how the commercial equipment operates. Inefficient equipment is something else. There's been a lot of gains made in the past few years. Not so much with the HVAC side. Maybe on the compressor technology there has been. On the DX equipment there's been a significant gain, but on the air side there's not so much. But lighting, there's been huge gains in lighting in the past 5 years, and it's continuing with now the solid state lighting is coming out. There's going to be continual improvements there. Billing errors and improper rates that kind of go together, and that's something that your spreadsheet I talked to you about earlier, getting those bills into a spreadsheet can help identify some of that for you. We actually found a $1 million mistake on a bill about 5 years ago on one of our bills, which you would think is real obvious, and it's obvious, but it was actually fairly difficult to get Progress Energy to accept the mistake. It was on their side, and so that's an example of an extreme example of what you could do by looking at your bills more closely. And then one of the things that we've done made a lot of inroads with is this run hours, whatever, making sure that equipment's not running when it's not needed. That's what we term energy conservation versus energy efficiency. Energy conservation we call making sure everything is off that doesn't need to be on, kind of thing, or doesn't need to be running at that moment. So that's looking at your run hours and making sure that you have sufficient automation and process in place to make sure that equipment is shutting down at the right time, or if you don't have that automation, that you have somebody tasked with that ability to get that stuff turned off. Finally, O&M is key, and we talked a little bit about that. An example of that is your filter changes on your HVAC equipment, but there's much more that can be done there. ASHRAE just published a standard actually on O&M for commercial buildings, and it's a minimum standard, but I think it actually is. It may not be where a lot of people are at, so I encourage you to look at that standard. I think it costs about $20 to buy the publication, and that would give you a baseline level to maintain your equipment at. Besides the $1,500 that's lost, what else? If you're running a hotel, you're losing occupancy possibly. If you're running a rental area, occupancy. If you're producing widgets, you may have lost production opportunity there. So there could be much more. If you look at salaries, if you have a degradation in your performance of your people, salary dollars far exceed what you're ever going to do with energy. It's upwards of 10, 15 times the cost of energy costs. So the effects could be quite a bit larger on your organization than just the energy.